What is going on, everybody? We're going to take another step back, and I just love reviewing older technology, older phones, all that stuff. You guys already know. It seems like every single video I have to reintroduce myself. But the phone we are looking at today is the Samsung Galaxy S7, and I already did a review about it this year, but I kind of want to see, and I'm doing a lot of these new kind of updated reviews in the later part of 2018 to see if it's still worth it, whether it's not worth it, to see if anything changed. And we actually did get a new Android version since I did this original video, so it's kind of fun to step back. And there are going to be eventually ROMs for this thing, so kind of going forward and looking at it, seeing whether you should go pick it up or whether you shouldn't. And the cool thing is that these prices for these phones have dropped since the initial release and since my initial video, so it's always fun to look back. But the Samsung Galaxy S7 came out in February of 2016, a little bit over 2 years ago, but not really that much longer. It's only been like not even 3 years yet. And since then, we've got the Galaxy S8 and the Galaxy S9. Now, this phone did come out at a time where bezels weren't really shrinking yet. So going from a Galaxy S6 to a S7, the bezels around the screen did shrink a little bit, believe it or not, but mostly around the side. We still have pretty big bezels on the top and bottom. We do have a fingerprint sensor though, so that's a really good thing. But you do have capacitive buttons on the side. So upon initial look, you might think like this phone looks outdated, this and that. But one great thing about this phone is that it still feels fairly premium. You do have glass obviously on the front, but you also have it on the back as well. And that's one thing Samsung really did well. It's just their build quality. I still think the Galaxy S6 feels pretty premium, and the Galaxy S7 just adds on that. And when you're holding it, especially the gold version, it feels like a very premium phone. Like it feels like $1,000 phone, which is crazy to say, but really, I feel no difference between this and an iPhone XS if I'm being like dead honest. Now, the home button is a little weird, I'll be honest. It's a little wobbly. I think their parts don't necessarily hold up that long. The power button, the volume buttons might seem a little rocky too, but just from first holding, I think it feels pretty good. Now, you do have a micro USB charging port on the bottom. You do have a headphone jack though, so it kind of like balances out a little bit. No USB Type-C yet. They added it on the Galaxy S8, so I don't really think it's that big of a deal, so we're just gonna kind of leave it there. Now, one huge advantage of this phone is that it does have a 5.1-inch Super AMOLED display, and it's actually 1440p, and it has 577 pixels per inch, and that's a pretty big deal. Like when you compare this to something like an iPhone 8 Plus or another iPhone, even like an iPhone XS or 10, this phone I believe would have a better screen, and I think this panel is a little bit better. Now, one thing the iPhones have going for it is the software is pretty good, so you have like True Tone display and all those things, but even at that level, this panel is still very, very good. But one bad thing about panels, just OLED panels in general, is that burn-in is a real thing, and if you aren't careful, you could probably get a phone or a used phone or whatever that has burn-in, and not only does it affect your visibility, it's just basically stuff that's always there, but it also drops the resale value quite a bit. So if you have an OLED phone, make sure you don't like keep it on too much or whatever, so you don't burn the pixels in. But if you get a used one, just make sure there's no burn-in on the display, ask for pictures and all that stuff. But if you get a brand new phone, that's not going to be an issue. You're not going to have burn-in, so just keep that in mind. Now, another awesome thing about this phone is that it does have IP68 dust and water resistance. So that's a humongous advantage that you have. You can go 1.5 meters for up to 30 minutes of water. So if you dip it in water 1.5 meters for 30 minutes, you'll be good. If you splash some water on here or there, you'll be set. And that's a huge advantage. And most phones now are kind of going in that trend, but at this time, still a lot of phones weren't even water resistant at all. Now, in terms of software, this is probably the weirder aspect of it. It started off getting Android 6.0, and now it is upgradable to Android 8.0 Oreo, but you didn't get like Android 9.0, which is expected because Samsung doesn't really, expand their software all that much. Now, I did hear rumors that it was getting Android 9.0 eventually, but I don't know if that's the case. I will set that question off to you. I'm unsure as if it's getting it or not, but from what I've seen, there are actual Android Pie ROMs out for this thing, so that's pretty cool. Now, I'm unable to actually verify that because I'm in the middle of a video, but if it's not even out yet, there are going to be ROMs out eventually. But I think Android 8.0 wasn't that horrible on this thing either, so just kind of keep that in mind. Now, it is a shame that this thing's not getting any more software updates, but I think the fact that you can update it yourself through root and custom ROM is also a viable option, and you should definitely consider it. Now, in terms of the specs itself, it has an Exynos 8890 octa chipset. It has an octa-core CPU clocked at 2.3 GHz and 4 GB of RAM. And with those specs, I'll be completely honest, I still think those specs are respectable for sure. respectable specs, get it? I don't think they're horrible specs at all. I think this phone, in terms of on paper, is still very, very decent. But there are some software things that really kind of bug me out. Now, TouchWiz is kind of weird, but if I can get over just the weird lag TouchWiz has, I still think this phone is very capable, and I still think it's pretty fast. I really don't have any complaints in terms of that. I think the Galaxy S6 was a really weird thing, and they mostly fixed all those issues on the Galaxy S7. And one main issue I had in terms of the overall performance and everything was through the heating of the phone. The Galaxy S6 had it, the Galaxy S4 had it really badly, and the Galaxy S7 did fix it a little bit. It still had a heating issue sometimes, but I don't think it was as bad as the Galaxy S6. It definitely wasn't as bad as the Galaxy S4, man. That thing was crazy. So whether you're multitasking, heavy multitasking between apps, and whatever have you, this phone will definitely be able to handle it. I'll say that gaming isn't that bad either. The more intensive games you kind of get on it, it'll be pretty much okay. Now keep in mind that even with Android, I know they do this with iOS, but with Android, usually big intensive games benchmark your phone in the background to see whether it needs to up it or lower the graphics. So on this phone, maybe towards the later part, and then maybe next year, you'll notice that some games do run a little bit slower just because you are updating the games through the App Store. So even though your phone isn't getting updated itself, you are still updating it through the Play Store. So all those apps and everything, they might be a little bit slower through time, but I don't think it's going to be that big of a hiccup. So in terms of performance, dude, I'll be like, it's like a 7.5 out of 10. Like, it's not horrible. It's probably like a 7 out of 10, maybe like a 7.5. I don't really have too many complaints. It's pretty safe in terms of that. It's just a shame that it's not really supported by software anymore. And this doesn't really mean much, but the Galaxy S7 and the Google Pixel 3 XL, the one that was just released, have the same amount of RAM, so that's kind of weird. I totally expected Google to kind of take it up a notch, but it's whatever. The Google Pixel 3 XL should be faster though overall, but still, it's kind of weird that happened. Now switching to the camera, I think it's a pretty big deal. I think it's pretty decent. I think it's definitely a pro. It's a 12 megapixel sensor. It has optical image stabilization, LED flash, all that good stuff. I still think it's pretty good. You can shoot 4K, you can do 1080p at up to 60 frames per second. And I think just in terms of a camera overall, it's very decent. And on top of that, this phone actually has a lot of features within the camera itself. I know compared to something like a Google Pixel or like any phone like that, it's kind of stock Android, so they only have a few select features, but with TouchWiz, they actually just bloat the thing up with a ton of stuff. So in terms of features and everything, the camera is good. Video quality is pretty good too. I don't really have too many complaints in terms of that. The front camera is 5 megapixels. You can shoot 1440p videos on it. And overall, I think the camera is definitely a pro on it. I'll say it's like a 7.5 out of 10 probably too. There's no like specific features or anything in the camera that stand out to me, but I still think it's a very capable sensor. Now, another good thing about this phone is the battery life, and more so the battery size. It has a 3000 mAh battery, and battery life isn't amazing or anything like that, but it's definitely respectable, and I wish I could complain about it because battery life is one of those things that I love complaining about, but kudos to Samsung because they went from a Galaxy S6 that had like a 2000 whatever 400 500 mAh battery, and they upped it to 3000 mAh. So I think that's a pretty big deal. I don't know if they increased it or decreased it with the Galaxy S8. I don't remember the specs of that right on top of my head, but the fact that they increased it on this phone is very cool. Battery life, like I said, is pretty decent, but the fact that Samsung increased it in and of itself is a very good thing. Now, one thing I have to keep in mind is if you're getting this phone used, I have to tell you guys, the battery size probably isn't 3000 mAh anymore. And what I mean by that is throughout time, the more you use a phone, batteries, anything really, anything that has a battery, it deteriorates, so it goes down in like the size it is. So it's probably not 3000 anymore, probably like 2700 mAh or even probably lower than that, depending on how much you use the phone, the condition it is, and all that stuff. So I'm unsure how easy it is to replace the battery on this thing, but if you're kind of in that market, or if you're comfortable doing that, I'd probably recommend doing that too. But I think if this battery had its full charge and everything full size, I think it'd be pretty good. And it's definitely a pro for this phone. Now, some other notable things to note, like I said, this phone has a fingerprint sensor. Another humongous thing to keep in mind is that this phone does have expandable storage. So technically speaking, you can get the lowest memory size they have, the 32GB variant, and just put like a 128GB SD card in it and be set. So you don't have to spend more money on the 64GB variant. You can just spend more money on an SD card, save even more money that way instead of spending more money for a higher variant. I hope that makes sense to you guys, but the fact that this thing does have an SD card is humongous, and I would definitely recommend phone manufacturers, if anybody's listening, make sure you keep the expandable storage. That thing is amazing. The build quality, in my opinion, is pretty good. Camera, like I said, single sensor, but it's definitely like capable of taking decent shots. And it's IP68 dust and water resistant. So is the Samsung Galaxy S7 still worth it in the later part of 2018? I will say, this is how I'll break it down. If you currently just plan on having a phone for a little short while, maybe up until like maybe a year, I will say yes, this phone is definitely a pretty good option. You know, camera's awesome, battery life is pretty good, screen is amazing, all these other things, has a fingerprint sensor. But the one thing that really kind of hesitates me from fully recommending it to like a broad set of people is probably the software updates. I know a lot of people who are listening right now aren't comfortable like customizing their phone or rooting it that kind of does push a lot of people on the side, but that doesn't necessarily mean like you should not get this phone if you don't want to do it. So I gotta respect that. I'll say if you don't plan on keeping a phone for too long, like for years and years, yeah, Galaxy S7 is a pretty decent option. But at the same time, I mean, this phone isn't necessarily like extremely cheap. I think they're still selling for maybe over $100. There's a lot of other phones out there for that price point that are possibly still getting supported. I knew the Google Pixel is one of those phones, and it shares a lot of the same specs. I mean, it has a little bit less RAM, but it still has the AMOLED screen, amazing camera as well. So I'll definitely say that if you're in the market for something like that, a Google Pixel is also a very good option, but the Galaxy S7 is also very good as well. So I'll leave a link to both those in the description below if you guys want to get it from there and actually help support the channel at the same time. But that's pretty much my take on it. That is my opinion. I'd love to know what you guys think though, so leave some comments in the comment section if you guys think it was still worth it or not. I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, my Galaxy S7 is so slow, or my Galaxy S7 is still a beast. So it's cool that there's a divide there, but I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. But if you guys have any other questions or anything like that, leave it down there too. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber we get really does count, so it means so much you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. I do a lot more like iOS reviews and stuff like that, but seldomly do I post Android videos, but you guys might like it, so give it a click. It's down there as well. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.